I'm Kendra, 34 years old, and tonight was supposed to be a celebration of my 10-year marriage to David. We were surrounded by friends and family at Le Ciel laughing over champagne toasts. But all evening, David seemed on edge, checking his phone, scanning the entrance. Then she appeared. A confident woman in red, sliding an envelope across our table. My stomach dropped as I reached for it. If you're watching this from somewhere that's felt the sting of betrayal, drop your location in the comments and subscribe to join others who've turned their pain into power. I met David during my second year at Columbia University. I was pursuing my psychology degree while he was completing his MBA. We first crossed paths in the campus library where he asked to share my table during finals week. What began as casual study sessions quickly blossomed into something more meaningful. David had this incredible ability to make me feel like the most fascinating person in the world. His blue eyes would lock onto mine when I spoke, making everyone else in the room disappear. Our first official date was at a tiny cafe near campus called Mercer's. We talked for hours over coffee that grew cold because we were too engrossed in conversation to remember to drink it. He told me about growing up in Connecticut with his mother after his parents divorced, and I shared stories about my childhood in Minnesota with my tight-knit family. The romance that followed was nothing short of magical. David would surprise me with weekend trips to charming towns along the Hudson River. He'd leave little notes in my textbooks that I'd find days later. For my birthday, he arranged a private tour of a psychology exhibit at a museum because he knew how much I loved my field of study. After dating for 2 years, David proposed at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in front of my favorite painting. He'd coordinated with the museum staff to have a small section cordoned off for our special moment. When he dropped to one knee pulling out a vintage-inspired ring, I couldn't say yes fast enough. Our wedding was everything I'd dreamed of. We held it at Lakeside Manor with string lights reflecting off the water as we danced under the stars. My father's toast made everyone cry, and David's vows promised a lifetime of adventure and unwavering support. Looking back at those photos now, our eyes were so full of hope and certainty. After a honeymoon in Greece, we returned to start our life together in a cozy 2-bedroom house in a suburb just outside the city. It needed work, but we spent weekends painting walls and planting a garden, making it truly ours. Those early days were filled with such simple joys. Sunday morning coffee on our porch marathon sessions of our favorite shows, and learning each other's quirks and habits. As our careers developed, we cheered each other on. I established my practice as a child psychologist, specializing in trauma work. David climbed the ranks at Marshall & Reed, a marketing firm with major clients across the country. We were building the foundation for the life we'd planned together. We decided to wait on having children, focusing instead on establishing ourselves professionally. David was particularly adamant about being financially secure before starting a family, and I agreed that it made sense. We talked about revisiting the conversation after our 5th anniversary, but somehow the timing never seemed right. Looking back, I can pinpoint when things began to shift about 3 years ago. David started working later hours, often not coming home until I was already asleep. At first, I didn't think much of it. His firm had landed several new clients, and he explained that the additional workload was temporary. I supported him, making sure dinner was waiting when he got home, even if it meant reheating it at midnight. Gradually, our quality time diminished. Date nights became rare, then practically non-existent. Our conversations grew shorter, focusing mostly on logistics rather than connection. When we did have free time together, David was often distracted checking emails or taking calls. I tried to reignite the spark. I planned surprise date nights, booked weekend getaways, and even suggested marriage counseling as a proactive step. David would participate half-heartedly, his mind seemingly elsewhere. Still, I held on to hope. We had built something beautiful together, and I wasn't ready to admit it might be crumbling. For our 7th anniversary, I arranged a return trip to the Greek island where we'd honeymooned. For a few blissful days, it felt like we'd found our way back to each other. David was present, affectionate, and engaged. We made promises to prioritize our marriage moving forward. I truly believed we had turned a corner. But within weeks of returning home, the distance returned. David installed a fingerprint lock on his phone for work security purposes. Our intimate life became increasingly rare. When I tried to discuss these changes, David assured me everything was fine, that I was overthinking things. I wanted so badly to believe him that I ignored the warning signs flashing before my eyes. Every relationship has its seasons, I told myself. This was just a challenging one we needed to weather together. How wrong I was. The first real indication that something was seriously wrong came about 2 years ago. David had always been somewhat protective of his phone, but suddenly, it never left his side. He'd take calls in another room, his voice hushed. If I walked in, he'd abruptly end the conversation or switch to discussing obvious work matters. Late-night text messages became frequent. The phone would light up beside our bed at 1 or 2 in the morning. When I asked, David would mumble something about international clients or time zone differences. It seemed plausible given his company's global reach, but the explanations started to feel rehearsed. Then there was the perfume. David came home one evening smelling distinctly of a fragrance I didn't recognize. It wasn't overtly strong, but as a woman you notice these things. When I mentioned it, he claimed he'd been in close quarters with clients during presentations all day. Again, a reasonable explanation, but my instincts were whispering that something wasn't right. His business trips to Chicago became suspiciously frequent. Marshall and Reed did have offices there, but David had never needed to visit so regularly before. During one of these trips, I called his hotel room late at night and got no answer. When I questioned him the next day, he said he'd been having dinner with clients. The explanation came too quickly, too smoothly. The credit card statement that arrived the following month contained an anomaly that was harder to explain away. There was a charge for the Westfield Hotel, a luxury establishment in our own city, on a night David had told me he was working late. When confronted, he claimed it was a business lunch in the hotel restaurant that had been incorrectly billed as a room charge. He promised to have the accounting department address it. I sat David down one Sunday afternoon and laid out all these concerns. The protective behavior with his phone, the unknown perfume, the hotel charge, the constant late nights. I wasn't accusatory, just honest about my growing anxiety. His response was textbook gaslighting, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. "You're being paranoid, Kendra," he said, his tone condescending. "This is exactly why I don't share more about my work with you. You turn everything into some kind of conspiracy. I need you to trust me," he continued, taking my hands in his. "These suspicions are really hurtful. I'm working this hard for our future." He looked at me with such sincerity that I found myself apologizing to him. Imagine that. I apologized for questioning his fidelity when my intuition was screaming that something was wrong. After that conversation, I began to doubt myself. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe years of working with traumatized children had made me hypervigilant to potential threats. I shared my concerns with my best friend Taylor over lunch. "Hire a private investigator," she suggested immediately. "These aren't random suspicions, Kendra. There's a pattern here." But I couldn't bring myself to take that step. It felt like such a violation of trust, and despite everything, I still wanted to believe in my marriage. Instead, I planned a surprise weekend in Vermont, hoping that time away from work and everyday stresses might help us reconnect. 2 days before we were set to leave, David canceled. An emergency with a major client required his attention throughout the weekend. I offered to reschedule, but he was non-committal, saying his upcoming months were too unpredictable for concrete plans. The final straw came when I was organizing our home office and found a receipt tucked in David's desk drawer. It was for an $1,800 bracelet from Tiffany purchased just 2 weeks earlier. My birthday had passed months ago, and our anniversary was still months away. More importantly, I had never received such a gift. That night, I barely slept. Anxiety gnawed at my insides as I lay beside the man who was becoming a stranger to me. The next day, I made an appointment with a therapist. I needed professional guidance to sort through my fears. Dr. Warner listened attentively as I detailed my concerns. Rather than validating them, however, she suggested I might be projecting my insecurities onto David's behavior. Sometimes, when we're feeling unfulfilled in our own lives, we look for problems in our relationships. She explained. Have you considered that your suspicions might stem from your own dissatisfaction? I left that session feeling even more confused. Was I manufacturing these problems? Was this all in my head? Despite mounting evidence, I tried to recommit to believing in my marriage. I focused on the good memories, the years of building a life together. I tried to remember the David I fell in love with, convinced he was still there beneath the distant, secretive man who now shared my bed. How desperately I wanted to be wrong. As our 10th anniversary approached, I decided to channel my anxiety into planning a celebration worthy of a decade together. If our marriage was struggling, perhaps a meaningful commemoration of our journey might help us find our way back to each other. I wanted to remind David of all we'd built together, of the promises we'd made, and the love we'd shared. I reserved the private dining room at Le Ciel, an upscale French restaurant downtown. David and I had dined there only on special occasions, and I thought the elegant setting would underscore the significance of this milestone. The restaurant featured intimate lighting, impeccable service, and some of the best food in the city. The private room would allow for a personal touch while accommodating our guests. The guest list included 15 of our closest friends and family members. My parents would fly in from Minnesota. David's mother would drive up from Connecticut. Our respective best friends from college would attend, along with colleagues who had become friends over the years. I wanted to surround us with people who had witnessed and supported our relationship from the beginning. I spent hours designing personalized invitations featuring a collage of photos from our wedding day and significant moments throughout our marriage. For the menu, I selected dishes that held special meaning to us, including the mushroom risotto we'd enjoyed on our first anniversary and the chocolate soufflé David always ordered for dessert. One of my most time-consuming projects was creating a video montage of our decade together. I dug through digital archives and photo albums selecting images that captured our journey. Vacations, holidays, quiet moments at home, all set to the song from our first dance. Watching that montage alone in our living room, I cried both for the beautiful memories and the fear that they belonged to a chapter that was ending. The customized cake was another labor of love. I worked with a bakery to recreate a smaller version of our wedding cake, a 3-tier confection with delicate sugar flowers cascading down the sides. The top tier would feature the same vanilla bean cake with raspberry filling that we'd saved from our wedding day and eaten on our first anniversary. Throughout all this planning, David remained notably uninvolved. When I asked for his input on the menu, he replied with a distracted, "Whatever you think is best, honey." When I requested he compile a list of colleagues he'd like to invite, it took 3 reminders before he provided just 2 names. His indifference stung, but I rationalized it as work stress and continued with determination. 2 weeks before the anniversary dinner, I discovered a hotel keycard in the pocket of David's suit jacket while sending it to the dry cleaners. The card was for the Westfield Hotel, the same establishment that had appeared on our credit card statement months earlier. This time, there was no plausible explanation involving a business lunch. I confronted David as soon as he came home that evening. "I found a keycard to the Westfield in your pocket," I said, my voice shaking despite my efforts to remain calm. "What's going on, David? I need the truth." His reaction was immediate anger, a response I'd come to recognize as his defense mechanism when cornered. "Are you searching through my things now?" he demanded, his face flushing. "That's a new low even for you." "I was sending your suit to be cleaned," I explained, feeling absurdly guilty despite being the wronged party. "The key card was in your pocket. Why do you have a room at a hotel 20 minutes from our house?" "It was for a client," he snapped. "We needed a private space for sensitive negotiations, not that you'd understand the complexities of my work." "Then why hide it? Why not just tell me?" "Because you overreact to everything." His voice rose to a shout. Can't you just focus on our anniversary instead of creating problems? Is that too much to ask? I retreated physically and emotionally. The exchange left me shaken, but more certain than ever that my husband was hiding something significant. Still, with the anniversary dinner just days away and guests already making travel arrangements, I decided to proceed. Perhaps the evening would provide clarity one way or another. The day before the dinner, I spent hours getting ready. I'd purchased a navy blue gown that made me feel both elegant and confident. I scheduled appointments for hair and makeup, wanting to look my best for what I subconsciously understood might be a pivotal moment in my marriage. As the stylist curled my hair, I rehearsed a speech about our journey together, determined to focus on gratitude and hope rather than my suspicions. That night, David came home well after midnight. I pretended to be asleep as he slipped into bed, keeping to his side of the mattress. In the darkness, I wondered if I was fighting for a marriage that already existed only in my memory. Morning would bring our anniversary, and with it, an answer I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. The evening of our anniversary dinner started with the appearance of perfection. Le Ciel had outdone themselves with the private dining room setup. A round table dominated the space, elegantly set with fine china and crystal glassware. Fresh flower arrangements featured roses in the same pale pink as my wedding bouquet. Around the perimeter of the room, I'd placed enlarged photos from our wedding, along with votive candles that cast a warm, flattering glow. David arrived separately, coming straight from work. He looked handsome in his charcoal suit, the one I'd given him for Christmas the previous year. When he kissed my cheek, I caught a whiff of the cologne I'd always loved on him, and for a moment, I allowed myself to hope that the evening might rekindle what we'd lost. "The room looks beautiful," he said, surveying my handiwork. "You've outdone yourself, Ken." "Thank you," I replied, searching his face for signs of the man I'd married. I wanted tonight to be special. As our guests began to arrive, David played the role of devoted husband convincingly. He kept his hand at the small of my back as we greeted people, laughed at all the right moments during reminiscences about our wedding day, and seemed genuinely engaged. Yet I couldn't help noticing how frequently his gaze drifted to the entrance of our private room, how often he checked his phone beneath the table. My parents arrived, my father enveloping me in a bear hug while my mother fussed with my hair. "You look radiant, sweetheart," she whispered, though her eyes held a question. My mother had always been intuitive about my emotions. David's mother followed shortly after, bringing a small gift box containing a pair of earrings to commemorate the occasion. Our college friends brought a lightness to the gathering, teasing us about how young and naive we'd been at our wedding. Colleagues commented on how we'd both grown professionally while maintaining our connection. If only they knew how tenuous that connection had become. Once everyone was seated and the first course was served, a delicate mushroom velouté, I stood to give my toast. The words I'd rehearsed came easily, speaking of our journey from nervous young couple to established partners. I touched on challenges we'd overcome, adventures we'd shared, and dreams we still pursued together. Throughout my speech, I kept my eyes on David, willing him to feel the sincerity behind my words. When it was David's turn, he rose somewhat stiffly. His toast felt rehearsed and hollow, focusing more on accomplishments than emotions. He thanked everyone for coming, but said little about our relationship itself, or plans for our future. As he sat down, he reached for his water glass with a slightly trembling hand. The dinner progressed through each carefully planned course. Conversation flowed around the table, with guests sharing their own stories about marriage and commitment. In the corner of the room, the video montage played silently, a visual testament to happier times. Occasionally, a guest would glance at it and comment on a particular memory captured there. During the main course, an exquisitely prepared beef tenderloin, David's hand found mine under the table. The gesture surprised me, and I turned to find him watching me with an unreadable expression. For a brief, shining moment, I thought perhaps everything would be okay after all. That illusion shattered when I noticed a woman at the bar just outside our private room. She was striking with blonde hair falling in loose waves around her shoulders and a fitted red dress that commanded attention. More concerning than her appearance was the fact that she seemed to be watching our table with unusual interest. "David," I murmured, "do you know that woman at the bar, the blonde in the red dress?" His reaction was immediate and alarming. His face paled as he followed my gaze, and the hand holding mine suddenly withdrew. "No," he said quickly. "Never seen her before." But his body language told a different story. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting between the woman and the exit. Within minutes, he excused himself to use the restroom, but I watched as he instead approached the bar. Though the exchange with the blonde woman was brief, the tension in his posture was unmistakable. When David returned to the table, he was visibly shaken. He drained his wine glass in one swallow and signaled the waiter for another. The easy charm he'd displayed earlier had vanished, replaced by a jittery alertness that several guests noticed. "Everything okay, David?" my father asked, always direct. "Fine, just fine," David replied with a forced smile. "Just a minor work issue. Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow." As dessert was served, our recreation of the wedding cake alongside fresh berries and champagne, the blonde woman made her move. She approached our table with confident strides, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. The conversation around us died as 15 pairs of eyes turned toward this unexpected intruder. She stopped directly behind David, who had his back to the entrance. I saw the exact moment he sensed her presence, his shoulders tensing beneath his suit jacket. When he turned and saw her, the look that passed between them confirmed everything I'd feared and more. "Excuse me," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the suddenly silent room. "I don't mean to interrupt such a special celebration." David stood abruptly. "This isn't the time or place," he hissed, but the woman ignored him. With deliberate movements, she placed a cream-colored envelope on the table, sliding it toward David. "I believe your wife should see this," she said coldly, her eyes meeting mine for the first time. David's hand shot out to grab the envelope, but I was quicker. Something in me had been preparing for this moment, perhaps for months. The envelope was in my hands before David could intercept it. "Kendra, don't," David pleaded, his composure completely abandoned. "Let's discuss this privately. Not here. Not now." But it was too late. Some thresholds once crossed cannot be returned from. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope that would end the life I thought I had. Inside the envelope were several photographs, each one more devastating than the last. With steady hands that belied my inner turmoil, I examined them one by one. The first photo showed David and the blonde woman together at what appeared to be a cabin retreat. They were on a porch swing, his arm around her shoulders, both smiling into the camera with the easy intimacy of an established couple. The date stamp in the corner indicated it was taken during a weekend when David had told me he was at a marketing conference in Denver. The second item wasn't a photo, but printed screenshots of text messages between them. "Miss you already," David had written. "Last night was amazing. Can't wait for next weekend when we can spend the whole time together." Her response was equally affectionate, referencing inside jokes and future plans. The timestamps showed these exchanges occurred during normal business hours, not the middle of the night, as I might have expected. The third photo hit me like a physical blow. It showed a positive pregnancy test with a handwritten note at the bottom, 12 weeks now. Time to make decisions. The date on the note was just 3 weeks ago. The final photo was perhaps the most painful of all. It showed David with the blonde woman and a young girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. They were at what looked like a school event, and David had his arm around both of them, the three of them presenting the image of a happy family. A family I knew nothing about. Around the table, our guests registered the unfolding drama with varying degrees of shock. My mother gasped audibly. My father's face darkened with anger. David's mother covered her mouth with her hand, tears immediately welling in her eyes. Our friends shifted uncomfortably, caught in a deeply private moment they had no way of escaping. David's face had drained of all color. "Kendra," he began, his voice strangled. "It's not what you think. I can explain everything if you'll just listen." But the blonde woman wasn't finished. "My name is Sophia," she said, addressing me directly. "I'm a graphic designer at Marshall & Reed. David and I have been seeing each other for almost 2 years. 2 years? The timeline explained so much. The increased business trips, the late nights, the emotional distance. While I'd been planning anniversary surprises and trying to save my marriage, David had been building a separate life with this woman. He told me he was separated. Sophia continued, her voice harder now. He said you two were going through a divorce, but keeping it quiet for professional reasons. I believed him until last month when I saw your social media post about planning your anniversary dinner. My mind flashed to the Instagram photo I'd shared of the invitations I'd designed, excited to celebrate our milestone. The post that had apparently unraveled David's carefully constructed lie. When I confronted him, he swore he was going to tell you everything after the anniversary, Sophia said. That he'd been trying to find the right time. I wouldn't have come here tonight if I'd realized you had no idea about any of this. I'm sorry it's happening this way." The room was absolutely silent. Even the waitstaff had frozen in place, unwilling to intrude on the scene unfolding before them. My father was the first to react. He stood slowly, his napkin dropping forgotten to the floor. "You've been cheating on my daughter," he asked David, his normally gentle voice dangerously quiet. "For 2 years, while she's been planning this dinner to celebrate your marriage." David seemed to shrink under my father's gaze. "Sir, it's complicated. Kendra and I have been having problems for a long time." "Problems you never mentioned to me?" I interjected, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "Problems you never suggested we address together." David's mother approached me, tears streaming down her face. "Kendra, I had no idea. Please believe me, I would never have condoned this." She turned to her son with an expression of profound disappointment. "How could you do this? We raised you better than this." The scene should have been unbearable, but strangely, I felt a sense of calm settling over me. The months of anxiety, of second-guessing myself, of trying to fix something while being kept in the dark about what was actually broken, all led to this moment of clarity. The truth, however painful, was a relief after so much uncertainty. I stood smoothing the front of my carefully chosen dress. The room fell silent again, all eyes turning to me. What would the betrayed wife do? Scream, collapse, throw something? Instead, I walked to where the waitstaff had set up the microphone I'd used for my earlier toast. Taking it in hand, I surveyed the room, making eye contact with each person present. Tonight was supposed to celebrate love and commitment. I began, my voice clear and unwavering. Instead, it's become a revelation of betrayal. But I won't let this moment define me or diminish the genuine love and friendship in this room. I turned to face David directly. You've made your choice over and over for 2 years. You chose lies instead of honesty. You chose another woman instead of working on our marriage. You chose to build a secret life rather than address problems in the one we shared. Now I'm making my choice. With deliberate movements, I removed my wedding ring, the symbol of promises now proven hollow. I placed it on the table beside the damning photographs. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I said, addressing our guests once more. "I'm sorry our celebration turned into something else entirely. Please enjoy the rest of your evening." With that, I walked out of the private dining room, past the stunned restaurant patrons, and into the cool night air. For the first time in months, perhaps years, I could breathe freely. The worst had happened, and somehow, I was still standing. I drove to Taylor's apartment in a state that I can only describe as shocked clarity. The familiar streets of our city seemed both unchanged and entirely new, as if I was seeing them through different eyes. In a way, I was. The world looks different when the foundation of your life has been revealed as an illusion. Taylor opened her door, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a fierce hug without a word. Only then, in the safety of my best friend's embrace, did the emotions finally break through. I cried until my elegant makeup was destroyed, until my carefully styled hair fell in disarray, until my body shook with the force of my sobs. "He has another life," I managed between gasps for air. "Another woman, maybe even a child on the way." Taylor guided me to her couch, wrapped me in a blanket despite the warm evening, and poured me a generous glass of wine. "Start from the beginning," she said gently. "Tell me everything." As I recounted the events of the dinner, my phone began buzzing incessantly. Messages from dinner guests expressing shock and support, calls from my parents asking where I was if I was safe, and texts from David, dozens of them ranging from apologetic to desperate. "I never meant to hurt you," one read. "Please let me explain everything," said another. The most revealing, "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. We need to talk about what comes next." What comes next? As if we would be negotiating a business transaction rather than the implosion of our marriage. I turned off my phone, unable to deal with the barrage of communication. The world could wait until morning. Tonight was for processing the unimaginable. Sleep eluded me, despite Taylor's comfortable guest room and the emotional exhaustion that had settled into my bones. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw those photographs. David and Sophia together. The pregnancy test. The little girl who might soon have a half-sibling. Questions tormented me through the dark hours. How had I missed the signs? Could I have prevented this if I'd been more attentive, more exciting, more something? What would my life look like now? Morning brought no answers, but did deliver a strange sense of resolve. While Taylor slept, I made a list of immediate actions needed. Consult an attorney, secure financial records, find temporary housing, break the news to extended family and colleagues. Each item I wrote helped transform my pain into purpose. By 9 o'clock, I'd confirmed through mutual friends that David had not returned to our home overnight. This provided the opportunity I needed. I drove to our house, half expecting to find him waiting, but the place was empty. It felt both familiar and foreign, like visiting a museum dedicated to a life I used to live. I moved efficiently, packing essential clothing, important documents, and irreplaceable personal items. In our home office, I discovered more evidence of David's double life. A drawer that had always been locked for client confidentiality yielded easily to a letter opener. Inside were receipts for jewelry I'd never received, hotel stays in our city, and others, and most disturbingly, financial documents showing David had been moving money into a separate account for over a year. The betrayal extended beyond the emotional and into the practical. While I'd been contributing my income to our joint accounts and shared expenses, David had been systematically diverting funds. Preparing it seemed for exactly this eventuality. By noon, I was seated across from Patricia Hawkins, a divorce attorney recommended by a colleague. She listened to my story with professional detachment, occasionally making notes. "The good news, if we can call it that," she said when I finished, "is that you have clear evidence of infidelity and financial misconduct. Some clients spend months and thousands of dollars trying to prove what landed in your lap last night." We discussed strategy, and by the end of our meeting, I had authorized her to file for divorce and request an emergency financial order to prevent David from accessing or moving any more of our shared assets. From the attorney's office, I went to my bank and opened individual accounts in my name, only transferring my recent paycheck there instead of our joint account. The manager, who had known David and me for years, was professionally discreet, but I could see the questions in her eyes. Taylor had cleared her guest room for me, insisting I stay as long as needed. "Consider it yours until you figure out next steps," she said when I returned with my hastily packed bags. I'm working from home this week, so you won't be alone unless you want to be. The news of what happened at the anniversary dinner spread quickly through our social circle. My phone, once I turned it back on, was flooded with messages of support, mixed with thinly veiled curiosity. I crafted a simple text response to close friends. Yes, David has been unfaithful. Yes, we are separating. I appreciate your support, but need some time. For others, I simply didn't respond. David's attempts to contact me grew increasingly frantic. Calls, texts, emails, even a handwritten letter left with Taylor's doorman. I read them all, but responded to none. His explanations and justifications held no weight against the evidence I'd seen with my own eyes, the public humiliation I'd endured. The physical toll of stress manifested in unexpected ways. I lost 7 pounds in the first week after the dinner. Sleep came in fitful bursts, leaving me exhausted. Even basic tasks required conscious effort. Recognizing the signs of trauma from my professional training, I sought out a therapist specializing in betrayal trauma, someone separate from my professional circle. Dr. Elaine Bennett provided a safe space to process my rage, grief, and fear. What you're experiencing is normal, she assured me during our first session. Discovery trauma is very real, and the way it happened for you in such a public setting compounds the injury. Telling colleagues about my changing circumstances was difficult, but necessary. My practice partners were understanding, offering to cover sessions if I needed time. Clients didn't need details, just awareness that I was going through a personal transition that might occasionally affect scheduling. 2 weeks after the dinner, David's mother visited me at Taylor's apartment. Agnes had always been kind to me, treating me more like a daughter than an in-law. Now her face was lined with additional worry as she hugged me tightly. I raised him better than this, she said, echoing her words from that night. I don't understand how he could do this to you, to himself, to the life you built together. I made tea as she sat at Taylor's kitchen island, her hands clasped tightly together. Has he always been this way? I asked a question that had haunted me. Was there something in his childhood that I missed? Agnes shook her head sadly. David's father was unfaithful, which led to our divorce. David witnessed the fallout firsthand. He promised he'd never repeat those mistakes. She paused, looking down at her wedding ring, which she still wore despite being widowed for years. Sometimes, the lessons we think our children have learned aren't the ones they actually take away. Before she left, Agnes handed me a small box. These were meant to be your anniversary gift from me. I still want you to have them. Inside were pearl earrings that had belonged to her mother. You'll always be family to me, Kendra, regardless of what happens with David. That evening, I received an unexpected message from Sophia. She asked if we could meet, assuring me she had no intention of reconciling with David, but felt there were things I should know. Against Taylor's advice, I agreed to a brief meeting at a cafe far from my usual haunts. Sophia looked different than she had at the restaurant, less polished and more human in jeans and a simple blouse. Her face showed signs of the same stress that I'd seen in my own mirror. I want you to know that when I realized David had been lying to me about your marriage, I ended things immediately, she began. The pregnancy test in the photos was from 3 months ago. I miscarried at 10 weeks. The information hit me strangely. Relief that there wasn't a child involved, mixed with unexpected sympathy for her loss. David manipulated both of us, she continued. He told me you were cold and career-focused, that you'd agreed to separate but wanted to keep up appearances. He told his daughter Lily that you knew all about her, but didn't want to be involved in her life. His daughter, I echoed, remembering the little girl in the photo. From a brief relationship before he met you, he reconnected with her mother 3 years ago and started building a relationship with Lily. That part is actually true, but he told me you resented the time he spent with her. The revelations kept coming. David had created elaborate contradictory narratives for different people in his life. He'd told Sophia I knew about her. He'd told his daughter's mother that I was supportive of their co-parenting arrangement, but preferred to keep my distance. He'd told colleagues that our marriage was an amicable partnership rather than a love match. Different versions of David, different versions of me, different versions of our life together, all carefully compartmentalized until the anniversary dinner brought them crashing together. As painful as those days were, they provided a clarity I'd been lacking for years. The fog of confusion and self-doubt lifted, revealing a path forward I couldn't yet see clearly, but knew existed. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was making decisions based on truth rather than illusion, and there was a certain power in that, even amid the heartbreak. 6 months after the anniversary dinner that changed everything, I stood in my new apartment, hanging the last of my artwork on freshly painted walls. The one-bedroom space in a different neighborhood was nothing like the house I'd shared with David, and that was precisely the point. New beginnings require new surroundings. The divorce had been finalized with surprising efficiency. David, perhaps motivated by guilt or the desire to avoid further public embarrassment, had agreed to generous terms. Patricia, my attorney, had leveraged the evidence of financial misconduct and infidelity effectively. While no settlement could compensate for the emotional damage, the financial outcome provided stability as I rebuilt my life. I'd learned through mutual acquaintances that Sophia had ended things with David permanently after discovering more lies in the aftermath of our anniversary dinner. Apparently, I wasn't the only one he'd been deceiving. His professional reputation had suffered as well, with several colleagues distancing themselves after learning how he'd conducted himself. With the legal matters settled and a physical space to call my own, I began focusing on emotional healing. Dr. Bennett's therapy sessions helped me process the trauma and recognize patterns I didn't want to repeat. "You didn't cause this," she reminded me often. "His choices reflect his character, not your worth." Reconnecting with myself became a priority. I rediscovered interests that had fallen by the wayside during my marriage. I joined a hiking group that explored trails outside the city each weekend. I took a pottery class I'd always been curious about. Small steps toward reclaiming joy. An unexpected source of comfort came from an old college friend, James, who reached out after hearing about my divorce. We'd lost touch over the years, but his genuine concern and lack of prying questions were refreshing. Our coffee catch-up turned into regular walks in the park, where conversations flowed easily between serious topics and lighthearted reminiscences. One of the most healing experiences came through a support group for divorced women that Dr. Bennett recommended. Listening to others share similar stories of betrayal and recovery reminded me that I wasn't alone. More importantly, seeing women further along in their healing journey gave me hope for my own future. During one particularly powerful group session, I found myself sharing the full story of the anniversary dinner for the first time. As I described the moment Sophia approached our table, the photos she revealed, and my calm departure, I realized how far I'd come from that night. "You handled it with such dignity," one woman commented. "I didn't feel dignified," I admitted. "I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience." "But you didn't let him see you break," another group member pointed out. "That took incredible strength." That conversation sparked something in me. The next day I started a blog called Betrayal and Beyond, sharing my experience anonymously but honestly. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments poured in from women and men in similar situations, grateful for the candid discussion of both the pain and the recovery process. Writing became therapeutic, and the blog quickly gained followers. Within months, I was receiving invitations to contribute to larger publications about relationships, betrayal trauma, and resilience. What began as personal healing evolved into a platform that helped others while creating unexpected professional opportunities. After much consideration, I decided to take a 6-month sabbatical from my psychology practice. My partners were supportive, and my clients were transferred to trusted colleagues. The break would allow me to focus on writing speaking engagements that had begun to materialize, and most importantly, continuing my own healing journey. With newfound freedom, I booked a solo trip to Italy, fulfilling a long-held dream. David had always dismissed the idea, claiming European vacations were overrated. Walking alone through Tuscan vineyards and ancient Roman streets, I felt a sense of liberation that brought tears to my eyes. I was reclaiming not just my present, but the future I'd always wanted. In Italy, I made friends with fellow travelers who knew nothing of my past. To them, I was simply Kendra, a psychologist from the States, with a quick laugh and thoughtful observations. Their perception helped me see myself through fresh eyes, not as a betrayed wife, but as a complete person with value independent of my marriage. Upon returning home, I received an unexpected invitation to coffee from Michael, a psychologist I'd met at a professional conference years earlier. Our professional paths had crossed occasionally, but we'd never spent time together socially. His warm smile and obvious interest were flattering, though I approached the situation cautiously. "I've always admired your work with trauma patients," he said as we sat across from each other at a quiet cafe. "And I've been following your blog. Your insights are helping a lot of people." I'd made the decision to attach my name to the blog a month earlier, a step toward fully owning my story. "Thank you," I replied. "It's been healing for me, too." Michael respected my boundaries, never pushing for more than I was ready to give. Our professional discussions gradually expanded to include personal interests and experiences. His patience and transparency were refreshing after years of David's deception. Through mutual connections, I occasionally heard updates about David's life. He'd been passed over for a promotion at work. His relationship with his daughter had become complicated by his pattern of unreliability. He'd reached out to mutual friends trying to learn about my life, but they maintained appropriate distance, protecting my privacy. This information no longer triggered pain or anger. Instead, I felt a detached sadness for the man who couldn't break his destructive patterns. The life he'd tried to build on lies was proving as unstable as one might expect. As I approached the 1-year mark since the anniversary dinner, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed. The revelation that was meant to destroy me had instead forced me to rebuild on a more authentic foundation. The photos Sophia had presented as weapons had actually been keys unlocking a door to a life more aligned with my true self. The wisdom I'd gained came at a high cost, but its value was undeniable. I'd learned that strength isn't measured by the ability to endure unhealthy situations, but by the courage to walk away from them. I'd discovered that forgiveness isn't about excusing actions, but releasing their power over you. Most importantly, I'd realized that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the most authentic life. The envelope that was meant to end my world actually began my real life. I wonder how many of you have experienced a betrayal that initially felt devastating, but ultimately led to growth. Has anyone else found unexpected strength in their most vulnerable moments? Share your story in the comments, and if this resonated with you, please like and subscribe. I share new insights about healing and resilience every week, and I'd be honored to have you join this community of survivors who are thriving. Remember, the end of one chapter is just the beginning of another, often better story. Thank you for listening, and I wish you healing on your own journey, whatever path it may take.